Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to City Hall. And thanks everyone for making it here. I know there've been some issues around with industrial action and slowing some journeys down, but everyone's made it. So thanks very much for that, and welcome to everyone who's here, particularly to our guests today. Andy Lord, who's the Commissioner for Transport for London, and you're now 3 months in, I think, officially, or
1 month.
only 1 month.
Yeah,
Okay.
About 9 months.
Okay, so anyway, it's good that you've been able to make it, and he's also joined by Kate Keane and Matt Canal. So thanks very much for coming today. And if you wish to introduce yourself in terms of your roles, please do.
Yeah, I can start. I'm Kate Keane and I'm the corporate affairs lead in the PhD's office supporting.
I'm Matt Canal, in the stakeholder advocacy and engagement team, and I take care of our relationship with London TravelWatch.
Okay. Well, welcome. Thanks very much for making the time. Are you still okay for an hour?
Yeah.
Does that work for you? That's great. So we'll obviously give you some time to present to us, not formally, but just to talk things through with us, and then there'll be some questions after that. So thank you for that. Just before we do start, just formally, I'd just like to add one apology from Tiffany Lamb, one of the board members who unfortunately can't be with us today, but she's over in Bristol, but everybody is here. So welcome, over to you, Andy.
Great, thanks. Morning, everybody, and nice to meet you, Michael, and the rest of you. Thank you for the opportunity to come this morning. It's great to be here. We have a very strong working relationship with London TravelWatch. I've had a relationship with the organisation since I arrived in TfL, which was November 19, initially as managing director of the Underground. We also then had the pandemic. Again, I think maintain strong links, making sure that we engage with you around how we respond to the pandemic. And then I became Chief Operating Officer February last year as we restructured the organisation. And I was really honoured to be asked to be interim commissioner, and now delighted to be having it full time. So thank you for that. I thought it would be helpful just to talk through our priorities and what I've set for TfL moving forward as we continue what I think is a much more positive journey post-pandemic, and the very short-term funding uncertainties that we had throughout the pandemic. Very grateful for the money that we received from central government to allow us to keep TfL running and maintain the services that we did. And on the back of receiving long-term funding agreement in August last year, which has given us certainty until the end of this financial year. I'll talk more about that in a moment, but I think there's an awful lot to be positive about actually for TfL and for London as a result, and of course, because of the actions that we're taking as a new executive team moving forward. So we've got 4 main objectives for TfL going forward, which we've been very public about. The first is to recover our passenger demand and grow our revenues, encourage people back onto the network, and I'm pleased to say that we're making really good progress there. In fact, probably stronger than any other public transport organisation in the UK. In fact, the recent figures showed that weekday demand on the tube and rail network was about 88% of pre-pandemic levels, and weekend demand is now regularly above pre-pandemic levels. In fact, a couple of weekends ago it was 108%. So that presents some of the older challenges that we were having to contend with pre-pandemic, and is causing us to think around how we deal with that going forward, assuming that becomes a longer trend. So it shows that there is a desire for people to use the public transport network if they have a purpose and reason to come into London or travel around London. And we're working hard with organisations and stakeholders around how we encourage growth on the weekdays to get those numbers up, because every 1% equates to about £50 million of additional revenue for TfL. So it's really quite significant for us. And of course, every pound that we deliver as a surplus is an extra pound we can invest in our customers, in our colleagues, and in our assets. So that's really critical. We're also being very successful at trying to reduce our reliance on what we call the fare box So pre-pandemic, about 75% of all TfL revenue came from passenger tickets, which is why we were so vulnerable as a result of the pandemic. We've now got that down to about 62-63%. A lot of that through regrowing our commercial revenues through advertising and that side of it, but also we've now set up a wholly owned subsidiary for property development, that will provide a dividend to TfL in the longer term. Relatively small to begin with, but could grow to be quite significant. TfL is the second largest landowner in London, so we need to make sure we maximise the potential of that, particularly as we look to rationalise some of our operational property. And in terms of what we're doing to actually encourage people back onto the network, touched on working with key stakeholders. You're one of those groups, but also working with businesses, Heart of London Business, for example, New West End Company, to see how we encourage people to use the network. We've also got the bus action plan, which we're making progress on, and it's starting to deliver some benefits on the bus network. We've also launched the Superloop, which is the new Outer London Express bus network. The first route went live with renumbering and refurbished buses last Saturday, and that will continue to roll out over the next 9 months or so. And then we'll continue to do some strategic work around particularly how we support public transport in Outer London, improving bus services, and think more about how they link into the rail network. Elizabeth Line has clearly been a huge success. Elizabeth Line's now carried over 185 million passengers in the 14 months or so that it's been open. And last week, the week before last, had its busiest week ever. 4.3 million passenger journeys in a week. 701,000 passengers on the Thursday, which was the busiest day since the line opened, and the customer feedback is extremely positive, and its reliability is extremely good as well. So we're really proud of that. About 30% of journeys on the Elizabeth Line are new journeys. So it just goes to show when you invest in public transport infrastructure and deliver a high quality service, it really does encourage people onto the network, and of course it's fully accessible as well, which makes a big difference. So that's some of the highlights. I'm happy to talk more about that as conversation progresses. Obviously, we've got to rebuild our finances. We are due to come off government funding at the end of this financial year. Our business plan that was approved by our board in December shows that, and then our budget in the new year shows that we will deliver an operating surplus in this financial year. It's modest, £79 million, but that will be the first time in TfL's history that we've delivered an operating surplus, and that is a £3 billion turnaround over the last 3 years, which I think is a truly remarkable performance. A combination of clearly revenue coming back up, but also consistent delivery of savings in the organisation. So we need to do that. The reason we need to do that is firstly so we're not reliant on government for revenue protection in effect, but also so that we continue to invest in our own needs. If we deliver that financial performance, we will be able to fund about 75% of our own capital needs. So next year we anticipate spending £2.1 billion of capital investment across the TfL network. 75% of that we will fund ourselves. The additional 25% we're in discussions with government about. Government recognise that TfL can't currently fund significant enhancements or major renewals without government support. So things like rolling stock replacement, major station redevelopments, major road network improvements. But if we can continue to grow our surplus, then clearly at some point in time it would be great if we could get to a place where we're fully in control of our own finances and portfolio. So that's really important. We've got to deliver another £600 million of recurring savings by the financial year 25-26. We've already delivered 1.1 billion since 2016. So it's a very significant task for us, but we're making good progress. Not without challenges. We clearly have to make sure that our savings program, efficiency program, is being done in a way that maintains or actually enhances our customer experience. Clearly, we've got to have some challenging conversations commercially with some of our supply chain, which we continue to do, but build a very strong relationship with them to see how we can maximise value for every pound we spend on the network. And clearly, we're engaged in negotiations and consultation with our trade union colleagues. Clearly, we've had some industrial action as a result of that, and more potentially for next week. And again, happy to take questions on that, albeit we are still in talks with the unions. So, yeah, I hope that we can find a way through that will lead to that action being called off. But at the moment, it's still on and will be very impactful. So our third objective is around having a critical role in delivering our agenda from an environment perspective. So delivering TfL's role to be net zero by 2030 in line with the Mayor's own ambition. We've got some very challenging targets on there. London accounts for about 50% of emissions, and transport is about 30% of that. And the buses are half of all transport emissions in London, even though we're all low emission buses. So we currently have a public target of delivering fully zero emission bus fleet by 2034. We have an ambition to accelerate that to 2030. We're taking some short-term actions to ensure that we don't make that target unachievable, because our buses and contracts on a 7-year cycle. It's obviously now being in 2023. If we don't renew contracts now with buses that are zero emission, we will miss the 2030 objective. So we are making a commitment that all contracts and all buses procured over the next 18 months will all be zero emission, whilst we work through the funding needs for the new bus fleet. Replacing the required number of buses is about a £1.1 billion project, which is very significant, but we're working with other metro cities and the bus manufacturers to find the best way to do that, and also taking through any green finance opportunities as well. With that, we're also enhancing features on the buses as well to make them a much more attractive feature for customers. We've got to decarbonise all of our operational buildings. That is very challenging. Some are easier to do than others. Some will not be possible to do, and therefore we'll have to consider what we do with those facilities as a result. So that's really challenging. And then there's much smaller initiatives that will become obvious, such as LED lighting stations and that sort of thing, plus new rolling stock will come with the latest environmental standards, etc. And then our final objective is around making TfL a great place to work, investing in our people, investing in their facilities and welfare where they're not suitable and acceptable in a number of areas. A particular focus on improving diversity and inclusion, and really improving representativeness at senior levels in the organisation to reflect the city that we serve. So there's a lot which is clearly a very internally focused element, but I'm a great believer if we invest in our people and really make them feel that TfL is a great place to work, it will pay off in terms of how they then look after our customers' needs and deliver a great service on the front line. All of that underpinned by what we call as our foundation, so delivering a safe, secure, reliable service across all our modes, because without doing that, then we don't have a proposition. Safety and security remain our absolute number one priority. We've got our Vision Zero action plan, which obviously was initially set up around the 2041 target, having no one killed or seriously injured on the road network. We're expanding that to make sure that now covers the whole of TfL's services. I don't want to see anybody killed or seriously injured anywhere on the TfL network, colleague or customer. So that's quite an ambitious target, particularly in some areas, particularly with roads still, where obviously we're not the owner of all the roads in London, but we continue to work very closely with the boroughs and London councils on how we work collaboratively to do that. We continue to invest in safer junctions, active travel, and of course continue to develop both bus safety and safety on the rail network. So that's kind of our focus and our objective. All of that linked to getting to a place where we can agree long-term capital funding with government and continue to deliver on the mayor's transport strategy. So I hope that gives you that flavour and overview, and probably continue talking, and happy to get into a discussion.
Andy, thanks very much for that. A lot of ground covered, and you've done all that in a month. But I mean, it's a big challenge. There's some very exciting opportunities as well. I mean, talked about in the line and that some phenomenal figures there. But beneath this, obviously some pretty big challenges facing, and you're not sort of covering those up. You've mentioned those already. So as we can dig into those a little bit more as we discuss things. I'm going to open this up first of all. So first hand up, I'll spot who it is. Anybody wants to jump in? Karen?
I would go first. So, hi, Andy.
Let's just introduce themselves. I'm sure you know.
Hi. So I'm Karen MacArthur. I'm one of the longer board members around the table. Thanks for coming along today. I just want to sort of pick up a little bit on the safety issue that you were talking about. I think there's been something like a 39% increase in crime on the underground that's been reported compared to pre-pandemic levels, but there are less journeys being taken. What's your approach to dealing with some of that?
So yeah, they're the stats that were published in our customer service and ops papers last week. So I think the first thing we need to say is actually overall levels of crime are very low on the transport network. A large percentage of a low number obviously makes is a concerning position. We're very focused on how we work together with particularly the British Transport Police on the rail network and the Met Police on the bus network and the street network, to make sure that we continue to do all we can to ensure criminals are deterred from doing anything on the network. We continue to invest significantly in our own transport security enforcement officers. So these are the team that you'll see in Navy uniform with various high-vis capability, smart hats, all the rest of their specially trained officers to support colleagues and customers on the network to give a visible presence to tackle fare evasion. They now can travel all over the network, whereas previously, the pre-pandemic, they were restricted. So we have more of them and the kind of capability, which is, I think, very reassuring. The BTP, we work very closely with Lucy Dorsey, who's the Chief Constable, and her team to work with them around intelligence operations. They support us on revenue operations. A lot of our issues are related to people who are fare evading and then taking action physically or verbally against either other customers or staff. And the occurrences of serious crime, I'm pleased to say, are very few and far between. And each of those are clearly thoroughly investigated by either the Met or the BTP, depending where they happen. We're also doing an awful lot of work around improving the safety of women and girls across our network. We know from surveys that, like yourselves and others have done, that about 50% of women and girls don't feel comfortable using the public transport network in London. That's a huge number of people that really concerns me, are afraid to use the network. So we've done a big campaign around making sure people are aware of what to do should they witness or be involved, hopefully, in any incident. We've improved the training for our staff so that they know what to do if they're approached by any raises any concerns. We've also started our active bystander campaign so that we encourage people not to get physically involved, but again to report and support anyone who may be subject to any form of whether it's verbal, physical abuse, and report it. And the police themselves are doing more in terms of visible availability on the network. And we're also looking at what more we can do around the TfL Go app to give people more choice and better tracking. So, for example, the next release of the TfL Go app will physically show where buses are on a topographical map, a bit similar to some of the taxi apps where you can physically see where the vehicles are. So again, that will give people reassurance. There's actually a hackathon with 30 of our apprentices, along with 15 from Amazon and 15 from Seabury. We set them this challenge and they came up with some really brilliant ideas that we're going to pursue on how we again can create safer walking routes through the app by encouraging people to walk via areas where there's better street lighting, open restaurants, whatever it may be, to encourage people to be safer. But we've got to recognise that post-pandemic, the rate has gone up slightly because of the passenger numbers, as you say. But we're really focused on taking a number of actual actions to improve safety and reduce crime. We're rolling out CCTV on the central line trains as they go through the improvement programme, and the new Piccadilly line trains will come with CCTV as well. So that will create a much better environment on those trains, and of course discourage anyone who's minded to undertake any criminal activity.
And are you setting targets for yourself around this, or are you just, there's a lot of activity going on, you're just hoping it'll be?
We haven't got any specific targets that are public, but internally we're looking at how we need to focus on that. We're working with the BTP in particular on the rail network, because they are very keen to ensure that they're focused on removing bad people from freedom, because we need to get them out of society if they're undertaking criminal activity. So we haven't got any specific targets as yet, but it's something that we certainly measure ourselves on in terms of the rates, and clearly want to get to, ultimately want to get to zero if we can. But yeah, I can't stress enough that compared to many other public transport networks, we're a very low crime environment.
Just before I open up, I just want to pick up on one thing you said to Karen there. You talked about, I think, 50% of women and young girls felt, I can't remember the word you used, but
Concerned about using public transport network.
which is a large number. Commercially, if those are people who might not catch the queue, that's money lost to you.
Yeah.
I just wonder whether you have any specific target to reduce that. So is there a sort of end game to get to? And might not be zero, but 10% of people have concerns, because that seems a big number of people saying, I just don't want to. If they can avoid it, they will avoid using public transport.
It is a big number, Arthur, and I think it's been heightened after recent tragic events that haven't happened on the public transport network, but clearly happened in London. I would like to get to a place where nobody should feel, there should be no, I don't want anybody to feel afraid of using public transport, regardless of whether they're man, woman, disabled, or any other protected characteristics. So our target is not specifically one around how do we reduce the number of women and girls who are afraid to travel, because I don't want any of them to be afraid to travel. Our target is more driven around improving our revenue, and clearly one of the key things that we've got an opportunity to make a difference on is getting more women and girls to use the public transport network, because that will drive our revenue up. So it's more of a revenue target and an initiative linked to that we can put a specific value on. I wouldn't really want to get into a target that say around 50% should become 25%, because we should be driving to zero, to be honest, because no one should feel fear of anything. There'll be an equivalent group of people who may be from the LGBTQ plus community, for example, or
I get that it could be much wider. I wonder if it's not measured, it's not managed, kind of thing. And I wonder if it is something that, as part of the plethora of statistics and targets that I'm sure you have, that ought to be one of the which would drive commercial, could drive commercial growth anyway. But
we will continue to track it for sure. I'm not sure necessarily we do have an awful lot of targets.
At least as a trend line, because if that remains at 50%, you're not going to make the progress. So at least having it in the background.
If it is a trend line, clearly the action you're taking are not working. So,
Exactly. Right, thank you then. Sorry, Alan, I think you were
I was just going to pick up on what you were saying about rail. The Go app showing bus locations. I think that's a very powerful, knowing where the next bus is. One thing that I've heard quite a lot recently is that the iBus information, the signs on bus stops are becoming increasingly unreliable. Buses appear out of nowhere, disappear, timing's not right. If my memory serves, before the pandemic, we were looking at upgrading iBus. Can you comment around accuracy and the future of that information?
So there, you're absolutely spot on. The system is not as reliable as it used to be. In fact, we had a very significant outage the weekend, which was linked to technical issue in the background. So there's two or three things in relation to that. One is we had to pause the re-procurement exercise for what we call iBus 2 because of the pandemic and the impact on our finances. We have restarted that. So I don't have the timescales to hand, but we can certainly follow up and let you know. But we are out to procurement for the new system. We need to, the two things that I've already asked Glyn Barton, who's our COO, who I know you've met, and our Alex Williams, who looks after our IT, to look at. One is we have to improve the information reliability of iBus as it stands today. It particularly doesn't perform well when we've got large events in the area and buses are either on some form of rerouting or diversion. I've experienced that myself. It doesn't matter if you're near Twickenham or near the Oval or Stratford or wherever it may be. We've got to make sure that we can provide reliable information to customers around buses that are operating an unusual pattern. And they've got to have confidence that if the system tells them it's going to arrive in 4 minutes, that the bus is going to arrive in 4 minutes and not still be standing there 15 minutes later. The second one is we had this strange scenario at the weekend where the system failed and it showed 3 different messages depending where you were on the network, either ranging from a blank screen to a whole load of code that wouldn't make sense to anybody other than a detailed programmer, to what I think is the most appropriate message to say, sorry, the system's unavailable, please use TFL Go app. So I've asked for that to investigate it to make sure that it is possible that we will have more outages until we replace the system. We need to make sure that we sort of have what I call a fail safe, that when the system is unavailable, there's a clear message to customers to say, system's unavailable, but please go to the TFL Go app. Or, of course, there is also the text service as well, which is pretty reliable too. But re-procuring iBus 2 is a real priority for us, and we will make sure, in fact, begin to involve yourselves, and if there's any particular features that you think would be helpful for us to consider putting into the new system, subject to technical delivery and cost, then it's welcome there.
Work together on. Thank you for that. I'm very conscious of people being remote from here that I haven't caught your eyes, Susan, and Priya just in fact we've got Priya's hand up there, so thanks, Priya.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Andy. Really pleased to hear about your 4 objectives. They sound generally in the right direction. Just quick introduction. I'm Priya Kullar. I'm one of the board members of London TravelWatch. My question was specifically around, the customer experience, and also a little bit touching on your point of passenger demand and how that's one of the objectives to increase passenger demand over the weekdays. The weekend sounds like it's better than pre-pandemic levels, which is a great sign. So on the customer service and operational performance report, the answer to the question TFL cares about its customers was 53%. So 53% of the people agreed with that statement, which is short of the target of 57%, which can be argued 57% sounds a bit low, doesn't it? But that's for another day. So in particular, customers cited strike action, cost of living crisis, and a busier network as factors that affect the overall score. So I was just curious to understand that some of these factors are going to continue over the next year or so. Given that climate, what do TfL intend to do to mitigate the impact on customers and help to increase our experience scores?
Thanks, Priya. I'm probably get risk of making it probably. So the latest customer care scores have increased to 55%, which for the last period, which is good news. Still below the target, but it's a positive step forward. And you're right in terms of the core elements that impact it. The other key element is service availability and reliability, and also how we handle disruption. Some of you may know I've spent 30 years in aviation, 26 years of those at British Airways, so I'm passionate about the customer and how we put the customer at the heart of our operational decision making. So we have done quite a lot of work with our operational teams around how they ensure they focus on the right decision for the customer rather than the right decision for the staff involved or the asset that they may have to move. And that is starting to pay dividends. Clearly, delivering a reliable service and a regular service is the backbone of ensuring we deliver for our customers. But then it's around improving real-time information. So we're making changes to both TfL Go and the internet and what we call our either ESUP boards or rainbow boards, but the large screens in stations that show the different lines to make them much more customer friendly and simple to understand, so that when there is disruption, people have a choice. We're rolling out 4G and 5G across the network. That will complete over the next 2.5 years, because hopefully we're planning to expand that to other networks as well. So that then will improve real-time information when things are not going to plan. It will also give people greater information in terms of wayfinding around stations. We're doing a lot of work around how we do more for accessibility on the network, not just step-free, but how we provide for customers with neurodiversity challenges, how we do more. We're investing in our staff to be much more proactive. So the changes we're making around the stations, staffing levels, for example, we are doing that to ensure that we have all our stations staffed from start of operations to end consistently, that we can continue to operate the turn up and go service, that we have staff who are proactively assisting customers rather than standing reading the newspaper or looking at their phone, unless of course they're looking at their phone to get more information, because again, the other benefit rolling out 4G and 5G is we'll be able to communicate more accurately to our colleagues on the network, so that they have the latest information if there is any disruption. And one of the other big elements of doing, having restructured operations, so all the modes, so overground, DLR, trams, LU, etc., all now sit under one executive officer. How we join up the thinking at an operational level, because previously it was all done in silos, frankly. So making sure we're not treating you as a tube customer or a DLR customer, we're treating you as one customer on the TfL network who may use multiple modes during your journey or during your day, so that we ensure our staff are best equipped to serve your needs, whether or not they're TfL colleagues or whether they're colleagues operating for one of our concessions. So that's a big thing. The other element is around focusing on condition and ambience. So we are all buses now being delivered will be delivered to the latest customer standards. So with USB ports, they'll have better flooring, which is a bit more warm. You'll see we've got new placards and signage on buses, making it a more welcoming environment. We'll have phone holders, the grab rails in every seat rather than the poles. And on the upper deck, there's the skylight as well. So it's a much more welcoming environment that I think will encourage more people to use our buses, and that will be positive as well. And they also have real-time tube style customer information and route information as well. So again, being more joined up across the nodes. And then in terms of our rail vehicles, making sure we're spending the appropriate money to replace damaged seats, keep them in good condition, because frankly, we haven't done that over the last few years, because it's been the first thing that gets cut is, you know, replacing seat cushions or whatever it may be. So that's a program of work that's going to take time to roll out, and at the same time focusing on how we try and get some of our stations into better conditions, so make it a much more pleasant environment in those stations that need it most. So there's a whole series of work. There'll be other stuff as well, but there's some of the key headlines, as well as making sure that we've got proactive customer service. People contact our contact centres as well, and people on, you know, spending time waiting on the phone to have it answered, and the agent at the other end can deal with whatever the issue is quickly and efficiently. So I hope that gives the flavour.
Thank you, Andy. Some really big items there, especially the one around siloed working. I think that's a big one to challenge, which a lot of corporates and companies face as well. In particular, just wanted to get your quick thoughts on the target itself of 57%. Given that the transport network is so integral to everyone's lives, do you think 57% is a little bit of a low bar?
Yes, absolutely. But you've got to have the actions to achieve a stretching target. So we haven't made it public yet, but we have ambitions to raise that quite significantly. But we've got to make sure we have the actions behind it to enable it, because there's, you know, I could set an 80% target, but, you know, instead of missing it by 3 points, I'll be missing it by 33. So I don't think you think of that. So I think we've got to be realistic in also, you know, we do have limited funds, so we've got to invest where we're going to get the best value and deliver the best value for money for the taxpayer and the fare payer. But yeah, absolutely, we need to stretch ourselves and deliver a more stretching target. The one challenge we have, and again, having come from the airline industry, where Net Promoter Score is typically the measure of choice, it's much easier to measure that and manage that because you have a controlled environment. We actually don't know who the vast majority of our customers are. We actually don't have the contact details for the vast majority of people who use our network, unlike an airline who will have 100% of their contact details. So we also have to be realistic around how can we survey better, how can we get more reliable information, because the other thing we do know, a factor sometimes in whether or not PFL cares, is also based on, you know, whether or not somebody's read the latest media headline or seen something on the TV that may or may not portray the actual position. So we're not quite as a controlled group as I think other service sectors have, and that's something that I'm keen to explore with the team, and Alex Williams is looking into that, so that we really understand what our true customers think of the service.
Great, thank you so much, Andy.
Just before I invite other questions, just on this satisfaction level, your satisfaction scores among disabled travellers are lower than the general figure. Do you see that as inevitable?
I think it depends what we're asking them. I think if it's in terms of access to the entire network, then yes, I would say that's inevitable at the moment, because we have to recognise on the tube, we've only got a third of our stations that are step-free. You know, this was once fully step-free, the last fully step-free, the bus network is fully accessible. But we've also got to be better at delivering more consistent service where we do have step-free access. Yeah, I don't know, I've had various communications over his personal experience and others. You know, it is unacceptable that we either don't have timely information to say that a lift is out of service and customers get stranded. It's unacceptable that on occasions some staff members don't turn up when they should do to assist customers, and it's unacceptable that it takes us so long sometimes to get assets back into service. So that's the focus. Also, we've absolutely got to fix, and it is entirely within our control. We've just launched or just issued a press release to say the next 10 tube stations that we're looking at the feasibility of making step-free. We've got government funding for Colindale and Leighton to become step-free and be redeveloped with the support of the boroughs there, who've been fantastic. And we're talking to a number of third parties around investigating. I think there's around another 8 stations that potentially, if we can get the third party support for the funding, we could look at making step-free as well. So my naive view perhaps is until the entire tube network, entire transport network is fully accessible, I think that rightly, I would expect disabled customers to be less satisfied because they don't have the freedom of access and the freedom to travel the way every able-bodied person does. However, what I would like to get to is that where they do have the ability to travel, their experience should be just as good, if not better, than anybody else using the network. And that's what we've got to strive for, whilst continuing to make the case to improve the accessibility on the network where we don't have it currently.
Accepting the realities as you've explained, and so you're trying to set targets and standards that are realistic at the moment. I fully understand that. I think whenever you have a 2-tier level of satisfaction, that can lead to a level of behaviour that is, well, that will always be lower. And actually, as you know, in trust variation, by doing the right thing, even when people face difficulties, by doing the right thing, you can actually increase the satisfaction level, you know, quite significantly. So by that human interaction that you might have, you could get some very strong scores. So I hope it's not seen as a, oh, well, that's just inevitable. It's always going to be lower, but recognising the physical.
No, absolutely not. I mean, that's why I made the point.
Yeah.
You know, if the question is around satisfaction with accessibility to the network, then I expect it to be lower until the network is fully accessible. In terms of the experience the disabled customer has on the network, it should be as good as, noting the conversation we just had around whether or not we think the target's good enough, but it should be as, you know, should be no different to anybody else's experience, and should be better because in a number of cases they'll be having greater interaction with TfL colleagues. And I'm a great believer of actually when things go wrong, we've got to make sure we prevent them going wrong in the first place, but we have to recognise inevitably they will go wrong on occasions. That's actually our opportunity to shine. And I've had many experiences of customers in the previous life who've had a shocking disruption to their journey, but actually the way we've responded and dealt with it has actually made them an even more loyal customer to the organisation going forward, and that's where we should get to.
So I'm just looking at Susan. I don't want to miss Susan out, but do you have anything you want to ask?
I do.
Yep, please do. Okay.
Hi Andy, thanks very much for joining us today, really appreciated. Susan Stockwell, I'm also one of the board members at London TravelWatch. My question is around your third objective in terms of becoming net zero by 2030. And you've talked a lot about that. I've got two sort of questions really. One is, how are you connecting into sort of any of your partners or any other organisations or any other sectors that can help support in terms of a joined up approach to becoming net zero? So that's probably my first question. And my second one is that obviously customers play an important role in us becoming net zero as a country. And I just wondered then, with public transport playing such a significant role in that, how do you get customers fully engaged, particularly where you've got rising prices, you've got some challenges around customer services and customer experience. So, you know, how do we get everyone committed into using public transport more, and all of those sorts of things, really, just because of this commitment that we've got from a net zero perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. So joining up with others, so we're doing a lot of work with our industry partners, particularly those who help or are part of our supply chain in construction and delivery. How do we learn from them? Because they work across multiple organisations, multiple sectors. So we don't know all the answers as an organisation. I think historically we've had a bit of a reputation of We do know all the answers. I'm very clear we don't. And we need to make sure we learn from other organisations, be they in the rail or transport sector, or be they elsewhere, to see how we can use technology, best practice, different materials, whatever it may be. So we're starting that engagement initially through the Rail Industry Association. Stuart Harvey, who's our Chief Capital Officer, is leading that work on our behalf. And then Lily Matson, who's our Chief Health and Safety Officer, is doing a lot of work with key stakeholders. She's also Non-Executive Director of the Environment Agency. So she's obviously party to what's going on at a more national level, particularly around climate change and adaptability. We've launched our climate adaptability plan, which focuses on how to improve our resilience during weather events, as well as how we ensure, working with the capital team, that we build infrastructure that actually improves the environment rather than makes it worse or just makes it no worse. We're also working very closely with one or two big organisations who are specialists in the area to get their advice and support and give us ideas on where we can look at alternatives too. So there's a lot going on. We are equally out after our own procurement at the moment for renewable energy, which is looking at whether or not there's organisations be prepared to build and operate their own renewable energy generation facility that would then have dedicated power delivery into TfL. So that's very significant. TfL is the largest consumer of electricity in London. So we've got to find a way to ensure that that is green by 2030. So that's a very big piece of work, and then continuing to look at what more we can do. New trains come with regenerative braking, so they put, as they brake, they convert the heat back into power and put it back into the network. They're lighter, so they use less power in the first place. And they're all being built from materials that are more sustainable in terms of their construction. On buses, we're working very closely with a number of organisations on how we improve the electrical infrastructure. We haven't ruled out hydrogen, but the challenge we've got with hydrogen at the minute, there's only one hydrogen production facility in the UK, and it's not 100% reliable in terms of delivery. So there needs to be more greater investment in the country around green hydrogen production, and that then might give us a further opportunity on that side of it. In terms of customers, I think it's a really interesting question, because if you were to segregate our customers by generation, they will have a slightly different view on this, I think. So the younger generations are much more focused on it. It's a very significant part of the employee value proposition, is demonstrating that we are a company that is focused on the environment and delivering net zero. There's a lot of younger people who won't join an organisation if they don't see that the environmental credentials or the aspiration is there. I think you've then got the much older generation who are perhaps less concerned about it, and then you've got a big chunk of people in the middle who are probably to some extent a mix of fence sitters or a leg either side of the fence, and I think we've got to do more to encourage them. Again, it depends by geography. We know different parts of London have higher levels of car usage than others. There's good reasons for that in some cases. The public transport proposition is not as strong. So we're doing a big piece of work which we'll develop over the coming months to see what more can we do to strengthen the public transport proposition, whether that's buses or whether that's linking in with rails and get a better, more convenient option for people using the car. We're looking at how do we communicate with car users to make them aware of, the journey you're taking today. You could do that by public transport and you'd emit, less NOx and less carbon dioxide. So make people help raise awareness of the environmental impact of the journey that they are making, and that there's a green alternative for them to use. So we're looking at how can we do that. How do we do more? The mayor is very focused clearly on how we do more to provide green infrastructure for electric vehicles as well. And we're in discussions, for example, with the taxi trade on how we do more to try and get them to convert more of their vehicles to zero emission as well. So there's a raft of actions around making people more aware of the journey they're making and the benefit or disbenefit from an environmental perspective, and equally how we continue to do more to publicise what we are doing. So you will start to see, for example, our buses being much more visible, the zero emission buses being much more visible in advertising that it's a zero emission bus, and explaining to people why that is. Our new Piccadilly line trains, we will do a lot of work as they come into service to explain the environmental credentials of those trains compared to the one we're replacing that went into service in 1973, for example. So there's a massive amount of work we've got to do here, and they're some of the early things we're focused on. But again, if you've got any suggestions, ideas, we'd be delighted to hear them, because we don't have all the answers.
I think that's great. Thank you for that. I think the only other comment that I would make is that, you know, to become net zero by 2030 requires a lot of behavioural change from everybody in the way that we live our lives. And I just wonder, with the important role that you play in providing public transport that is more, you know, positive from a carbon perspective, how other organisations and sectors can be the advocates for not only for what you're doing, but also, as you say, sort of saying, actually, maybe this isn't the way to kind of think about travelling, this is a better way, and all of those sorts of things, which is probably what led me to my first question, which was around partnering, to sort of, you know, this kind of more holistic approach, rather than sectors being much more focused in their own sort of, you know, what do they do, where actually you've got other sectors that could help and support and kind of think about it from that perspective, maybe.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I think there's a real opportunity, particularly to try and encourage people to come in on the weekdays. You know, how do we work with the big employers to get them to tell their colleagues this is the benefit of using public transport, particularly from an environmental perspective, along with all the other benefits. So there's definitely some action there.
Which helps your first objective ultimately as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. So I'm just conscious of time. A couple of if we overrun by 5 minutes,
Yeah,
sorry. Laura, would you like to just
Hi, Andy. I'm Laura Osborne. I'm also with London TravelWatch, and it was during the pandemic too, when I was also at Business London working on the original funding deal with some of your colleagues. So fantastic to hear about the operating surplus. That seems like a long way away at points in the pandemic. But thinking about your funding on an ongoing basis, a sort of a two-part question really. You mentioned those ongoing conversations with government about the additional or bridging that funding gap. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how those are going and what are the major sort of stumbling blocks there. And then on your point about other revenues, both commercial and your property portfolio, just interested if there are any other avenues that are also being explored in parallel. Thank you.
So thank you for your support when we did this. I think the business line played a key role in helping us make the case. So I would say the relationship between TfL and government is much more positive than it was certainly in the depths of funding discussions. There's clearly been some changes of key individuals on both sides, but particularly on the ministerial side. And the ministerial, the party politics definitely got in the way during the height of the funding deal. I'm pleased to say that there's far less of that now. I've built and maintained a very strong relationship with officials in DfT, so we're able to have open and frank conversations around some of the challenges we face and some of the wishes that we have going forward. In terms of the actual discussion, so we've been in ongoing dialogue around the conditions that we have to meet as part of our funding agreement, but also the conditions that we believe government need to meet as part of that funding agreement as well. They are in the agreement supposed to make us good for a degree of inflation costs. They've committed that they will provide us, or they've committed that we cannot provide all of our capital funding ourselves. So the process behind that is we actually had the first formal meeting last week between the Minister and the Deputy Mayor, myself, the CFO and others to discuss a way forward. And I'm pleased that we've agreed to continue discussions at official level through the summer. Obviously Parliament goes into recess. So I would hope that by late summer, early autumn, we'll have some clarity, particularly around funding for next year. So at the moment, we have a request for £475 million, which will enable us to deliver all of our business plan objectives and capital for the next financial year. And then we'll wait to see what happens around future years. If we don't secure that funding, we will have to make some difficult decisions around our current plans on capital delivery and investment for next year. Some of that may require commercial renegotiation on certain contracts. Some of it may mean that we can't start certain projects that we intended to start. So clearly we're working through options, but I very much hope that we don't have to do that, because the government have recently given funding to other cities in the UK, taking up to 2032, I think it is, and what they call London style funding. Both the Mayor and I have been very clear, London doesn't have London style funding beyond the 31st of March next year. So we need to secure that. You can't run the largest integrated public transport authority in the world on a month by month or even a financial year basis. It's ludicrous. And that's why we need to find a way through this, recognising the fiscal challenges of the pressure that the government is under. So, we'll continue to make the case, and I hope we'll get the right answer. In terms of the revenue, big focus on the benefit of more passengers on the network is we've got more people who want to spend money advertising on our network for their own business growth. We've got a great partnership with both JCDecaux and Global. We've got some very innovative new advertising capability, particularly on some of our Tube and Elizabeth line stations with 3D advertising. It's quite impactful, especially holding the handrail getting down the escalator. So that's one. The second one is around, I've already said, the property side of it. And we'll be shortly releasing an update to TfL Go that will enable people to use TfL Go for payments, which we think will be a significant improvement and clearly deliver a much more flexible option for customers as well. So they're the sort of big three key elements at the moment. And then we're looking at, we're doing a lot around partnering with organisations to offer either discounts on attractions if you use a TfL service or that sort of thing. So we've done a lot with historic Royal Palaces, some of the entertainment and West End and museums to encourage people into their events if they use TfL Travel.
Thank you. I know the live issue that we are in discussion with you is over you, Les. You avoiding the politics of it all, but I think it's been some interesting discussion we've had, and it's just to sort of understand a little bit more your thinking about a couple of points.
Thanks, Arthur, and thanks again, Andy, for coming today. Yes, you, Les, your team has been really helpful actually in responding to some recent correspondence from us. I would say at the outset, we support the aim of what the proposed expansion of ULEZ wants to achieve. It's really about making sure that we get the best deal for those people who are affected by it. And I guess my particular question relates to the adequacy of the financial package to support those targeted individuals either to ditch or replace their older polluting vehicles. We know that in outer London, 30% of the poorer households, and we're talking about households with an income of 10,000 or less, so the bar is set pretty low. Even with that bar there, 30% own a car. And the question is whether, what does, in your mind, what does success look like in terms of the penetration of that segment of the population with regard to getting access to and making successful applications for the scrappage grants?
So look, I mean, the mayor and all of us are very conscious of trying to provide whatever support we can for low income organisations and families around the scrappage scheme. The mayor's been very vocal around it. We should be getting some national government funding for this as well, but currently there is none. We've changed and improved the scrappage scheme over the last couple of months to increase the eligibility for it. We're still, we are seeing a good level of applications, but there's still a lot. There's still a significant amount of money in the 110 million pot available. So I'd encourage people to apply. The process works well. It's quite efficient. We also have done where we can to make people aware by either writing directly to them where we have the information to highlight that we believe they own a car that doesn't meet the required standard, and then with the information to say this is how they can apply for a scrappage scheme. We've also made it available for people to check on the TfL website. So again, you can do a very quick check on that. Clearly, we want to get to a place where we have very high compliance in the ULEZ zone, and as I think our assumption is that our revenue increase that we see through the introduction of the zone will reduce down to near zero within 2 to 3 years. From a financial perspective, this is not being done for financial reasons. The ideal from both a London perspective and a compliance perspective would be actually that we miss our financial targets. Now we can do that through one way, which is people not driving cars that they still have on their drive and haven't been able to afford to replace that. I don't think would be the right outcome. What we ideally want to do is people have got rid of their vehicles because they've decided that they can use public transport and there's a proper offering. So big role for us to make sure that we offer improved public transport. That's why we and the mayor have made such a commitment around improving bus services. And the second element is for those who do need a car, providing the support we can so that they can scrap it and replace it. But at the end of the day, we want to make that as easy and as accessible as possible.
Yeah, thank you. It's what I'm trying to, or what we collectively are trying to get our head around is that when we look at the latest figures about the successful applications. So on the latest figures, I think it's out of the 9,000 successful applications in total, 4,000 are from individuals who are on low income or disabled. We've still got a few weeks to run before the start of the scheme, obviously, and I guess TfL will be, as you said, encouraging people to take up where they are able to, but haven't yet done so. But what if it's 4,000 now, what does good look like? Is it it's not 40,000? Is it 10,000? Particularly within that context of nearly a third of low income households in outer London actually owning a car. I just don't get a sense of how you link the context with where numbers are actually at.
Yeah, that's what I probably need to come back to you on it. I don't really want to put a number on it, sure, because I'd love to say 100%, but we need to be realistic in our ambition and aspiration, and equally, depending on the needs that individuals have, whether they're they might be a single business, self-employed person, or they might have care reasons or whatever. I don't really understand or know the proportion of those. So I think let us take that away and see in particular what more we can do to raise awareness for this community, and is there more that we can do on that, because I do think a lot of this is around improving awareness and making sure that the people who fall into this particular group understand what is available to them, and then how they go about applying for scrappage or making sure they're aware of, you know, what other alternatives are available to support them.
Thanks. Thanks, Andy.
Just I think probably finally, with your time constraints, but I'd like to have had a question from the public. I think Alex, whether you could.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Alex Smith, head of campaigns at London TravelWatch. As Arthur said, we have a question from the public, which is about proposals to withdraw day travel cards. So this is something quite a few people have been in touch with us about over the past months, concerned that it's going to make it more difficult to travel, harder to get the right fare, particularly for people who are visiting London from outside, and combining it with the train ticket, and that pay as you go isn't necessarily a sufficient alternative. So for example, you can attach rail cards to contactless. You can do Oyster cards, but they have an initial cost. If you want a zip card, so you get the child discount, that also has a time and process implication, so it's not necessarily always sufficient alternative. I guess, what is your response to these concerns, and do you have any updates on the proposals?
So we in the mayor are still considering the proposal. We're only doing this because it was a specific requirement of the funding agreement that we had to look at ways of improving our revenue by between 500 and £1 billion per annum. Withdrawing the day travel card delivers tens of millions of pounds of benefit to TfL. It requires agreement with the rail delivery group, and any changes would need 6 months to be implemented. So if the decision was made, we would make sure there was a very clear customer engagement plan around what the alternatives are. Clearly, the rollout of what we call Project Oval, which is what the DfT announced a few weeks ago, and improving increasing the number of stations that have pay as you go and tap in, tap out, which is a program of work that TfL are delivering on behalf of National Railways, because we are the expert organisation in this. That will improve the capability and obviously include fare capping and that sort of thing as well as part of it. So we're very alive to the concerns and very aware of it. If the decision is made, we will clearly make sure that there's clear information around what the alternatives are, and I'll be working with the rail delivery group around how we improve the information and options for customers who currently use a day travel card.
Okay, thank you. And I know we've made the, sorry, I'm just
before we let Andy ask.
we just do a couple of quick ones then.
If I may, I know we're pushed for time. Andy, first one, can I get it on record? Thank you for your support of accessibility across the network. I think it's noted by the way we asked. Couple of quick questions. One that I asked both of your predecessors, and I'm now going to look to you. Crossrail 2 is currently I think lawful, but both Mike and Andy committed in Crossrail 2 to have one standard platform height across the network, so that we can have level boarding end to end. And I'd like to get the same commitment from you. The other question is, I note that there's a review of the stop bypasses pending. I just wanted a quick update on how that's going.
Yeah, thank you for your time spent, Darren, appreciate it. So I'm assuming, I'm going to hold my former commission to account that they've enacted their commitment, but we will go and check the design. But yes, I'm more than happy to make that commitment. Just so you know, and I think you probably do know, there's a very live issue at the minute with Old Oak Common and the Elizabeth line, and I have been I've come into Prince, the Secretary of State, and raised it with Permanent Secretary around the lack of level access that's currently planned for the Elizabeth line at Old Oak Common, which I said is totally unacceptable. So if you haven't got sufficient information on that, then feel free to follow up with us. And on bus stop bypasses, we are We're just doing some work around analysing how many incidents there have been of people being involved in either an actual collision or near miss. I'm pleased to say the numbers are actually extremely low, but nonetheless, we're doing some joint work that will then work with boroughs on to say, actually, where we do have bus stop bypasses, is the design appropriate? Are there sufficient mitigations in place to reduce the risk of collision, particularly for the visually impaired or blind? So we'll be happy to update you on that when that work's complete.
Andy, thank you very much for spending the time today. I know you're busy schedule, and do appreciate you coming over with us. I think a number of issues that we want to pick up separately, and we will do. I think the ongoing conversations we're having have been very productive, and I do think we can offer some real assistance to you in some of the decisions that are made. So we'll keep that dialogue going. It won't be once a year. There's a formal element, but as Michael and others have said, I think it's been a very good dialogue between the two organisations. So we can keep that going.
Very much so, and you know, we need to have a collaborative relationship. We need to listen to your views. We may not always agree on everything, but you know, this is a partnership. So I'm very happy to firstly meet you, Michael, in person, but continue that relationship. And I know we have a strong relationship with the rest of my ESCO team as well. So very happy to do that.
Just a really quick build on that. One thing that struck me from some of the conversation, and particularly your answers, was that whether it's explicit or possibly implicit, customers, how you engage, how you meet their needs, how you actually harness their power in terms of meeting things like net zero, it kept coming up as a theme, and it felt like there's an implicit strategy, maybe an explicit strategy, maybe it's one that's in development, but I think particularly using our engagement to focus at that high level, how's the strategy shaping up? How can we help you guys take it forward? Feels like a real kind of area of opportunity for us collectively.
Great, appreciate that. Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. But thank you very much for your help.
Thank you.
Right, well, welcome back. It was a good session with Andy Lord. We covered a lot of ground. You know, there's a lot to talk about in just an hour. But I think the good thing is we've got a good relationship now with Transport for London, where I think it's cooperative, but I think we're still able to challenge them, and they're able to respond to challenge. So I know there's been various discussions on issues that are ongoing, and we touched on them today, whether it be travel cards, ULEZ, and other matters. We will keep the pressure on them, but in a positive way, and I think they are seeing signs of some good work going on. But it's about keeping that pressure on, especially when finances and funding is a challenge in itself. So let's carry on with the meeting, the public meeting. Welcome to anybody watching. Hello again, Susan. Susan, I'm sorry you can't eat with us today, but anyway, we'll carry on anyway. Right, perhaps we can carry on with Michael and Chief Executive report. Michael.
Thank you, Alan. Sorry, thank you, Arthur. So I will take the paper that was circulated as read. There were within it two items where I indicated that I would have further information to share at this meeting. One was regard to the correspondence on ULEZ, and we slightly touched on that in the session just earlier with Andy Lord, but just to say that I have had quite a detailed response to my letter from a few weeks ago to Alex Williams. I've had a detailed response from TfL, and in many parts quite useful, but in other respects, perhaps some areas where we do need to kind of pursue a little bit further in the way that I did in the last session. So we will pick that up with TfL, not just with Andy, but with his colleagues. The second thing that was flagged in the paper, and this was on page 2 under campaigns and advocacy, there's a reference to engagement we've had with RDG on a particular topic. So it's the background, which I think we've mentioned in previous board meetings, is a concern we have about the way that national rail inquiries and indeed top websites display information about national rail London fares. And the concern is that those fares are advertised as the cheapest available, when in fact the cheapest available fare in many cases would be a fare that you buy via pay-as-you-go using your Oyster card or contactless. An issue we started raising in January. Well, actually, I think it was an issue that had been live before then, but certainly since I arrived, it was one of the very early things that I raised with RDG. To come to the point, National Rail Inquiries, as we have come to learn, is currently going through a refresh. And last week, I had a meeting with the RDG Chief Exec, Jack Starr, and a couple of members of her team to be briefed on how that refresh is trying to address the concern that we have previously mentioned. And so in part, they took me through some of the mock-ups of the new display of information as it's intended in part of the refresh. And this is a refresh which is due to go live in September. In a nutshell, I think they're making progress. So the reference to pay-as-you-go contactless or Oyster as an option to buy a London to London rail journey there is more prominent and higher up, particularly if you're using your mobile phone to access it. And that is the kind of focus for the National Rail Inquiry refresh. They're focusing in particular on how this can be an improved experience for all customers using the mobile phones. However, they haven't addressed all of our concerns, and there is, for example, still information which characterizes the national rail fare as the cheapest available fare when it isn't. So they understand that we still have some ongoing concerns. They were at pains to stress how important they realize this issue is from the point of view of customers using rail journeys in London. And I've got a further meeting on Friday this week to see what further news they have about how they can try and address the remaining concerns. So it's good so far, but further progress yet to be made, and not much time in which to do it if they stick with their current timescales. Happy to take questions either on that or anything else on the paper.
And just on that particular issue, I mean, you've been pushing relentlessly at this, Michael, and thanks for doing that. But my slight concern is that this is actually, it helps their revenue to some extent to have this anomaly. I suspect if they were losing revenue as a result of this, things might move rather quicker. But do you genuinely feel that they're moving at this quicker pace as is realistic, or there is still some big planning?
In a way, the timescales are actually now quite compressed because of this bigger refresh that is in play. And the risk is that in pursuit of that, for completely different reasons, nothing to do with the London situation, that we slightly get lost in pursuit of other objectives. To be fair to the team, when they debriefed me last week, they were, as I said, and they went out of their way to stress that, yes, they recognize this is important, and yes, this is something they want to resolve, subject to all the technical issues that are associated with any IT project. I think it's also fair to say, going to your first point about the revenue impact of this. In some of the earlier exchange I had with RDG, there was reference to the fact that any change that was going to be introduced as part of their wider project to refresh their website needed to be subject to a business case, and that had to go through an approval process. And I said, well, the business case is very clear. You are at risk of not complying with consumer law by misleading customers when you're trying to sell fares. And there is the risk financially of fines, ultimately, if we were to go to the regulator or other consumer regulatory bodies. I think that probably had some resonance.
Okay, well, thanks for keeping the pressure on that. I know it's been going on for some time, but you've stuck at it, so thanks for that, Michael. And any questions, comments on Michael's report? Go ahead.
Which I hope is not awkward, Arthur, in terms of the process for the chair from here. I had to look at those dates for the early August. What is the timing for the Secretary of State Transport approval? I can't remember.
There is no explicit timing for that. But what we have done is to contact officials of the department to let them know that at some point in the not very distant future, there will be a recommendation to approve a preferred candidate for the role. And essentially, we put the department on standby and hopefully to lubricate the process. And we thought that was important to do because at the moment, the Secretary of State will have lots of other things, I'm sure, which are occupying his mind. But we haven't got as far as understanding how long it might take once we've sent something over to them for us then to get some sort of decision from the department.
Well, I would encourage keeping that on there. Not for personal, but last time, and I was appointed, it took some while for that approval to come through. So let's bear that in mind. That there's a lot going on, I realise, in government, but from our perspective, we want something to run smoothly. So that's good that you've flagged that up. Thank you.
I think you might need a plan B.
Yeah, that's what I was just
Public,
gonna ask.
public appointments are taking in excess of sort of 6 months to agree in some shape or form. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's something we can pick up in private.
Yeah.
Session.
Why don't we do that?
And recluse myself.
They do, yeah. You can run away.
Run away.
But yeah, let's just perhaps have a brief discussion about it later. Just in the final. Thanks, Rosie. Any other particular questions for Michael? No, the report's clear. I like the dashboard. I know we've had various tinkerings with it, and you've given yourselves extra categories. I don't think that's any bad thing. I think it's quite useful just to be able to break it down, and so the differentiation between what's underway and what's completed, etc., and not started. So it gives us a clear vision of that and clear view of that. So thank you.
I'm going to run out of rainbow colours soon.
Yeah, no more categories. Five is good.
I'm conscious that we do obviously present it in this way, and it's easy, or it's intended to be easy to see where we are at any point in time. But it is very, very high level. And as I've said in the note, the intention, whether we can meet the ambition, I don't know, but the intention would be to maybe provide a little bit more detail when we get to roughly the half-year point. That actually is helpful anyway, because that would be the point at which we would be, I think, reporting back to the Assembly, I think, if I'm right, in terms of how we're doing against our objectives. I mean, it's not going to be a huge tome, a huge document, but something that gives you a little bit more feel for how we're progressing against those. That's the plan.
Okay. Right, that's helpful. Well, let's so that really will be in the autumn, so we'll know about good. Okay, well, there's no particular questions on Michael's report. Thank you. So that's feel where we are. And can we move on then to casework? Susan.
Thank you, Arthur. So I take the papers read. There is something to update on that happened since I wrote this. So I went to the penultimate scheme council of the Rail Ombudsman. The scheme council's last meeting will be in September. And then following that, there will be an independent board that will oversee the Rail Ombudsman scheme as it hands over to the ORR from the RDG. And then there will be a passenger panel that actually feeds into the independent board, who will be overseeing the Rail Ombudsman scheme going forward. And as far as the Rail Ombudsman, how that will be financed, it's still a kind of part standard cost and part polluter pays. but because the ORR can't fund the rail ombudsman the way the RDG could, because the way their finances are set up, the rail ombudsman will then start invoicing the tops on a, I think, on a quarterly basis, from a matrix that the ORR would have set out for them. So that's the kind of latest with the rail ombudsman. So apart from that, any questions?
Just on that ombudsman, we're obviously a player in that in terms of the independent panel. That will remain.
We won't be on the independent board, we'll be on the, because it has to be independent of the entire industry. The independent board, but a passenger panel will feed into it. So, and I already sit on the rail sector liaison panel anyway. Right. So we'll be going into it in two different ways.
So we maintain that,
Yeah.
regardless of any changes, that will remain.
Yeah,
Well, that's good.
absolutely.
And I know Susan does a lot of work, it's probably unseen by us generally, but always outside London TravelWatch in terms of making sure the ombudsman process works well, and it has certainly improved. I know there's a lot of things you'd like to improve further.
Yes,
I
they are much more willing to engage now. I've already had one meeting and we've sat out some of the terms that we would want to go into the MOU, which we will put together with Transport Focus. We will set up with the rail ombudsman. So we've got a kind of a clear picture of what we want to achieve, and then what we want to achieve going forwards as well. So the work has already started on that.
Just wanted to check, are we geared up for a ULEZ uptick in complaints?
When ULEZ went out to the North and South Circular, we were all ready for that, and nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened, because I think it's a bit like, you know, when you use Travel with Oyster, you've either gone into it or you haven't.
Right.
There is kind of no way grey. So people could come to us and complain about ULEZ itself, but they can't complain about being charged if they've gone into the zone with a non-compliant vehicle.
That's good to hear. There's maybe a few issues going on there that don't come directly to you. Okay. Nothing else for Susan? Okay, well thanks, Susan, for that. And I know separately you're having a lot of discussions with Transport Focus over the award of the entry contract.
Yeah, so well, that's kind of been stepped back a bit, because the contract with Ventricle will be between Transport Focus and Ventricle. It's not with London TravelWatch, because there's just to be too many people involved. So they have the contract and then we use it, and obviously I manage it on behalf of Transport Focus. So to do the tender, they're going through the Crown Services procurement process, and to do that you have to complete a whole pile of administration, which nobody really realised at Transport Focus until just at the point we were going to send the tenders out. But fortunately, Linda and I started all the work really early on, so we had time built in. So what should happen is there should be no impact on the deadline. We wanted to award in November, and if it was a different organisation, they would run simultaneously alongside Ventrica for the last quarter. And then the new organisation, or the incumbent organisation, would start on a new contract from the financial year next year. So, but everything's ready. Everything that I could possibly have done, I've done. It's already in sitting with Transport Focus now to take the next steps. We're looking to send out the tenders in August, at the beginning of August, and we will evaluate at the end of October. We'll evaluate separately. Priya, our board member, is part of the evaluation committee, and then we'll get together at the end of November and hopefully come down to either one or two names, and then we may have to do some site visits to make a final decision.
Good. Well, that's very helpful. If you can keep us updated, obviously, as that develops, but it sounds like it's all well under control.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much, Susan. And okay, can we move on then to campaigns, which I assume will be Alex?
So again, taking the report as read, just a few things I'd like to update from them. So one is obviously consultations are now live, and we are in the middle of the public consultation process. That does mean that we've had to kind of focus most of our resources on this. Obviously, there's some ongoing business as usual in the background. So, you know, still responding to important consultations when we need to. But this is the focus. That does mean that our next personal security report, which we were aiming to have out this summer, we are pushing back, but hopefully not too much, aiming to still have that out in early autumn. The other update since this report was drafted was, I think I mentioned in this report, the Transport Committee and the GLA asked us to provide a report into public transport in outer London. So we have pulled that together for them to inform their inquiry into public transport in outer London, just giving an overview what's available, how people are travelling, the impact of the pandemic, fairly sort of actual look at it. But since then, we also were invited to speak on the panel session last week, which I attended. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the questions were directed at the Deputy Mayor and TfL, but it was a good opportunity to raise so day travel card, which we've also discussed briefly here, that's to rail services, Superloop, provision of accessible transport, and all those sorts of things as well. So it's a good opportunity. I think the committee are provisionally planning a follow-up session in autumn again, so we'll keep an eye out for that. But yes, so the main updates for me. I don't know if anyone has any questions on either that or anything in the paper.
I know the rail safety working party session, and you said that it included a discussion on disabled access to trains and stations. Can you comment a little more on what that was about?
Yes,
And
so
what was said?
that was they invited, I can't remember exactly who it was now, so I can find out later and I'll follow up with you. But that was a presentation from others, so it was looking at step-free access, also level boarding. I think there was a bit around the new technology. So for example, the boards that I think TfL have been trying at the moment. So it was more of a presentation on that, and obviously encouraging to implement those where they can as soon as possible. But I can send you a full write-up after this. That'd be useful.
We'll have a chat afterwards. Thanks.
Just on the work that Alex did for last week's appearance at the Assembly, I don't know whether board members received a copy of your report.
No, I can share it.
I think it'd be good to share. It really was first class in the way it was put together, and it was a bit embarrassing. Alex, I don't know, a lot of work was put into that. It was two things. It showed the London Assembly, the Transport Committee, wanting our input, which they haven't always needed in the same way, but now they really feel that that's very useful. So, so I'm sure they appreciated the work that was put into it. But the report was covered in a very factual way a lot of key issues. So well done on that. And yeah, and I think it's great that we're invited into panels such as that to contribute as well. So thanks, Alex, for your work. Just on travel cards, I know an ongoing issue, we had some discussion on that. Is there, we've heard a little bit from the Transport Commission today, are we expecting anything in the near future in terms of any development of, or we're really on this, we're on hold at the moment, are we?
So we're on hold. We haven't been provided any timelines for TfL. It does sound like it genuinely is still under active discussion, not necessarily a done deal. But I think just with everything else going on, it maybe is not the number one issue for them to tell them.
No.
But we'll keep pressing them as well.
Yeah, but I think it's it feels that there's still an opportunity there. But you know, we've got a lot of pressures ourselves. until a decision is final, it's haven't been taken, so let's keep it in the pressure, and particularly working with others, if we feel there's opportunities that haven't been explored yet, let's continue that. But I think I've been looking under pretty well every stove for support and help, whatever. But if there's anything else, to keep pushing. Yeah.
It's just on the cycles note, Alex, just said you met London Council to talk about the work they're trying to do. I wanted to say a bit more about what they're trying to achieve across the boroughs, because I imagine that's quite challenging.
Yes.
To know where they've got to.
So I think there are some parts that are more attentive to can't have full detail for their that's follow up after. But I think they are just looking at particularly if there's a pan London approach. I think one of the issues at the moment is, well, legislation is needed for the TfL boroughs to have more strict regulation on this. But what that also means is that there isn't one approach. So different boroughs have different rules and regulations, for example, where you're meant to dock your bike after, whether that's basically anywhere or if it's meant to be in a sort of assigned bay area is different. And then obviously a lot of people will not know which borough they're in. They won't know the rules for which borough they're in. They'll be across different boroughs. So I think they're looking at making a more joined up approach to make it easier, both for people using dockless bikes, but also so it's easier to enforce and have clear expectations on those providers as well.
Thank you. Feels such a pain.
Yeah. And I mean, it's probably going to continue, isn't it? That's the challenge.
I think they are here to say so. Just making sure they
Yes, it's around the abandoned nature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's, someone's going to have a bad injury with those, we're aware of it. Right, just checking with Susan from afar.
Yeah, I'm all good. Thank you, Arthur.
I know you're shouting for them.
I will. I'll holler.
Okay, thank you. Right. Okay, well, thanks, Alex, for that and for all the work that's going on. And we move on to communications.
Thanks, Arthur. Yep, clearly the big kind of ticket item at the moment is the rail station ticket consultations that the last fortnight has taken a lot of attention. You'll have seen in the report I gave a kind of breakdown of performance of the comms items that we launched on the day one back in a couple of Wednesdays back. So those stats are quite a bit out of date already. But just to say, we'll be issuing a updated reminder press release tomorrow in partnership with Transport Focus to say 1 week left. Make sure you get your responses in. Just making sure awareness is very high nationally as well as London. People know the difference between the two watchdogs. In that release, we'll reference that we've this is breaking news. We've just got some stats in from Trevor this morning. So between the two watchdogs, we've got 100,000 responses in the first 2 weeks, which is a hefty number. I think it's a good sign that awareness is high and feeling about the closures is high.
And so that will be included. So we can include a generic figure obviously without saying what people are saying.
Yeah, we'll just give a to date we've had over 100,000 between Transport Focus, London TravelWatch. 1 week to go. Get them in. We'll see how many more we'll get, and we'll have a breakdown of how many we've had per watchdog as well that we could provide potentially. Yeah, apart from that, just a couple of items to tease out is the firstly shout out to Luke, who did the mini series with Alan, our vice chair, on how accessible is Elizabeth line. So a series of videos and the central line featured as well. So that was a good follow-up piece. I think we've got some good traction. In terms of social media highlights, so our top tweet was actually us wishing happy birthday to the Oyster card, which turned 20. Always the way that the campaigns you put your biggest effort into don't necessarily get the fruits you want, but it's a simple happy birthday. It got retweeted by the Mayor of London. Clearly he has a lot of followers, so apparently we had a potential reach of 3.25 million people just on that tweet, and hopefully when people land onto our profile, they then look at our other work, so it's all good. In terms of our impressions for the period on Twitter, we got 358,000 and a bit more, just to convey a very broad range of issues that we spoke about externally on social and other comms, which was things like coronation travel advice. Seems a long time back, FA Cup final and semi-final travel information, strikes. Laura's touched on the e-bikes, the issue of abandoned e-bikes, and various other items I could mention. And then two other things to mention, shout out to colleagues, was we've touched on the consultation around scrapping the travel card. So the brilliant consultation response we put in that generates some good external coverage as well. Got some good pickup off the back of the updated press release on that as well. And then secondly, Susan and the casework team were brave enough to welcome in a journalist into TravelWatch Towers. So then we had a piece which was a kind of behind the scenes look at what the team does. And that's been really useful in stakeholder meetings I've had. People have mentioned it to me. Oh, I didn't know that was part of the remit of TravelWatch, and kind of very clearly say that is one of our main remits. So it's good to get that out. Just to mention, we had in this period the time rail timetable changes. Nothing major particularly happened this time round. We were stuck quite close to a couple of the operators just to make sure there were no surprises. But our work on the Southeastern survey that colleagues put a lot of effort into that over the preceding months, that got picked up from BBC as well, because it was kind of a topical issue. So that was interesting to see. Then lastly, just to look at our kind of digital stats, because as you're aware, we had our website moved platform back in January. Pleased to say April 20th to 6th of July, compared to last year, number of site visitors doubled. So I think we're confident to say it's now a clear pattern that it's been well received. It's good news. The SEO is on the uptick, and hopefully our content is drawing people into the website as well. And then obviously the ticket office consultation will see a huge spike. So if we compare that for the next board paper with last year, we're out the water for sure. But I think after that period, we'll be back to be able to look at a kind of a baseline in terms of who's visiting the site and our numbers.
No, there's a lot going on again, David, and thanks. So just to have the statistical view that you provide is good. It gives us some numerical context, isn't it? And I think this doubling in the number of visitors is a great step forward. I think it's it's partly that we've got better SEO, I think, and it's partly that we've got better recording of what people are visiting. And just occurred to me, when we are going to have a lot of attention through the ticket office closure consultation. Is there anything we can do without overdoing it? But it's about saying, you've come in here, wouldn't you like to see this? It would be a classic Tesco supermarket. You go in for the thing that's in the shop window, but once we're inside, they've got all sorts of other offers. Is there anything else we can be doing that doesn't cloud? I don't want to confuse things. That's the risk in this. I mean, it's a very specific issue around ticket office closures. But if you feel there's any way of attracting attention to other things that we're doing, and we've already touched on some of those campaigns and the work we're doing on travel cards, etc. It'd be good to draw people in even more if we think that's feasible.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree. In terms of one we've issued our digital community updates. So we've a recent issue we led with ticket officers to get the kind of the clicks and people to look at it, and then throw in all of the other work we're doing along with that behind the scenes. And it's when we're liaising with journalists, because we're getting a lot of high profile national coverage on the ticket officers. It's also saying, oh, and I saw you know, you've been interested in this area. Right. So there are potential in different topics that we can harness, hopefully. Yeah.
Good way. Sounds like you're already onto that. So, as I expected you would, but it's good. You know, we won't have many opportunities to raise our profile, you know, and it's a very specific statutory function that from that there will be greater awareness of us. So so that's good that you're looking at that. Okay. Any queries for David? Clear report. Thanks very much, David, for all the work that's going on at the moment. And I do like, I know Luke's not here, I think it's done pretty good work with the videos. I like the one around the ticket office consultation with Michael. It's very clear, and it just brings it to life more than you can really do through text or anything on screen. So these, I know they do take a lot of time to get it right. So I do appreciate it.
First take.
First take. First take. Okay. Well done. Right. Let's move on then to I can see Shahid's with us from I assume from Manchester. Shahid, are you?
Hi Arthur. Yes, sunny Manchester today.
Sunny Manchester. Okay. We can blame that down here. But anyway, good to see you. And we've obviously had your finance report. So the management accounts. So is there anything you want to draw our attention to, Shahid?
I think sort of today largely we're in line with forecast. There's a couple of variances in between outturn and budget, and that is just purely to do with the pay uplift for staff. I'm in communication with colleagues at the GLA at the moment to kind of make sure we draw down that funding that will fund the sort of about 30,000. Well, it's an additional £20,000 what we had built into the forecast, but it's about just over £30,000 in total. So that's that. And then the other thing, just to sort of, I've just heard you talking there about the ticket office closures. So we've got £70,000 currently set aside for that. I think that's just one to watch over the coming weeks to make sure that we can stay within that budget or explore other avenues if needed.
Okay. Yeah. Just on the ticket office closures, and we talked a little bit about this earlier in sort of a private session, but clearly there's a cost that we pay per contact, and that's been budgeted for, as you've said, which is great, and hopefully it comes within that budget. I only wondered, is there anything my understanding from the electronic contact was that would be email contact, but maybe it wasn't worded quite in that way. It was any electronic contact. So the web forms that we're getting, which are template responses on the whole, I imagine it's simpler to deal with, but I wonder if we're still paying the same cost because it is simply a point of contact. I don't know how that looks.
I don't know, Shahid or Susan, whether you've got any,
I can.
or Alex.
So Venture Grow, which I think we mentioned, we're paying them to process these responses. We're paying them on a time basis. So the sort of quote per contact is just an average at the time. So you mentioned if there are some which are, you know, quicker for them to process, then that will cost less.
Right. Okay, no, it is on my time. I just my concerns with these are going through by the thousand, but they're only taking 5 minutes. So we might want to. Yeah. That's just already been dealt with.
I was just going to say, just in terms of time there, just judging from what's been what I've sort of gathered from Transport Focus, I think they initially sort of each contact was taking roughly about sort of two minutes per case. It's sort of since dropped to about a minute, just as they've kind of got more used to sort of the handling the cases. So it's roughly about £1 per case at the moment.
Right. Okay. And would it be, without going into any great lengths, would we be able to compare how we're doing as the two organisations? I imagine there'll be much for the muchness, but I suppose we'd like to just know that, just to confirm that it's not costing us more per case and
No, the per case costs are exactly the same, so there's no change. It's just the volumes purely. That will be different.
Okay. Good. Any queries around, or either around the ticket office disclosures or any other elements of the management accounts there? No. And just one what I wanted to ask on the finance report, Shahid. Remind myself, our current money in the bank, I think it was 426,000.
Yes.
Has there been a change in our funding this year? We did get the whole year up front, didn't we? But is it being done on 6 monthly now or
Quarterly now.
quarterly? Okay.
Yes.
So that was a one-off, the upfront.
Seems so.
Yeah. I thought it was too good to continue. Okay, so that's fine. So, but it's still coming through in the same the same amounts, but just spent quarterly. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I don't think I've certainly got anything else. It's just a good, clear view there for us. So, unless anyone's got any questions for Shahid. No? Okay. Well, Shahid, go and enjoy that Manchester sunshine.
Thank you.
Grab it.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Thanks, Shahid.
Bye-bye.
I know. And right, so in terms of the public session, we're on to any other business. If anybody would like to raise anything that is part of the meeting. No. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. I'll draw this this part of the meeting to a close. We'll take a break. We have got a meeting in confidential session, which I just want to just approve that to move into a confidential session after the break.
Yes.
Improve that. Okay. Well, thank you for those who who've been watching, and we'll continue the good work on behalf of London Travellers moving forward. And we'll see you at the next public meeting. Thank you.